Hey everybody, my name is Nick, and I'm the co-host of the Made in USA Manufacturing podcast, in which Calvin, who is the CEO of Air Representatives, who is a Missouri-based, USA-made manufacturer of injection molded parts and other plastic parts throughout the industry. Calvin, right now, this is very unusual for us. We like to do things in the same room together. This is, of course, obviously over Zoom, but the conflict in Iran has caused several problems with the supply chain. And we thought, given how our podcast is set up to help new founders kind of navigate the first and subsequent rounds of waters as they bring a new product on the market, this very much affects not only new consumers, but your tried and true customers that have been with you for a long time. So, why, in your opinion, as you and I have a relationship as basically I'm your client day to day. We also do this little pet project of ours here, but we have stayed in constant communications with the supply chain issues. So why are we having this particular talk now for everybody else?
Yeah, I think it's a good testimony and example of everything we've discussed over the last 6 months to a year of why you stay in constant contact with your molders, suppliers, and why it's so good to create that extension of business and that relationship so that you're when things go down like this, you're the first phone call or, first couple days of phone calls to get the insight, get an understanding of what to expect. And don't get me wrong, and we'll talk about this, it changes a lot. I mean, it's changing hourly at times through this conflict. But just having a grasp of what to expect, what we can do to help the process along the way. We're going to talk about supply, just securing supply a lot, and that's going to be a big portion of this of how and why, and but also don't panic, because you don't want to panic buy and have an oversupply. And I've been in situations like that. So it's just a good outline and a great testimonial of, we always talk about COVID and the what ifs of COVID if that ever happens. Well, we're seeing it real life now, completely different situation, but very similar parallels.
And this isn't the Iran situation right now is a little seems to be a little bit more devastating than normal, but normal supply chain issues could be things like hurricane season affecting the coast where raw materials manufactured. A few years ago, Texas had that freeze in which a lot of the manufacturing. So it's not just these major events; it's little events that can happen either regionally or worldwide throughout the time. Which again is why it's so important to form that relationship with your supplier.
Yeah, so the hurricanes, the natural disasters, the fires, those are blips on the map compared to what we're witnessing right now. This is going to be a major ripple effect that could last as long as 12 months. I'm not saying that there won't be corrections along the way, but we're going to be feeling this for they're saying anywhere between 6 to 12 months is what they're expecting. And that's assuming that everything gets, an agreement comes into play here in the next month.
And this isn't just a price increase. This is also allocations. It could be availability.
Yeah. That's the biggest one I'm worried about. And that's like I'm currently talking to my customers right now. We can talk about price all day. We can share the pain with our customers. The customers, there's going to be price increases. I lay that out first. Look, there's going to be price increases. Let's get to that in a little bit. Let's talk about the supply, because there's major allocations going out. I've seen as of 2 weeks ago, I haven't checked, but there was, I believe, 2 weeks ago was 51 force majeures on the market right now,
And
which is
yeah, explain.
go ahead.
Just to
Yeah.
explain that for us.
Yeah, force majeure, layman's terms, all contracts are thrown out and there's going to be allocations. So they're only able to secure a certain amount. So say you buy 1,000,000 pounds a year and they do a 50% allocation to their customers from producer to customer. That means you only get 500,000 pounds allocated to you for that 12-month period.
Is that allocation to you, Air Representatives, or to the individual clients that you represent?
It'd be to me or to the molder. So usually the suppliers are direct to molder, but I do a lot of negotiation with the resin suppliers because I like my hands in the pot there and to kind of, for situations like this, know what's going on, be in the know. So the molders, the distributors is really where the allocation comes into play. So producer, you've got producer, distributor, molder, customer. And so the distributors are now being allocated, which is never a good sign. They're talking, I've heard as low as for specific grades of ABS, a 30% allocation.
And next question, if you're using one distributor that's on allocation, you also could have backup distributors that also have their allocations that you could still be buying enough for potentially enough for everybody, but it's still going to affect prices.
Yeah, let's hold tight on that and let's talk about what's going on and what we're dealing with here and why it's so important to have multiple distributors.
So for right now, what's changing beyond the force majeures? What are you seeing with quotes right now?
Yeah, so let's every material is a little bit different. Okay, so ABS, I'm heavily endowed with ABS. That's our main product line is ABS. So we use anywhere between 1.5 and 2 million pounds a year. So we're pretty large user of ABS. The problem with ABS is our current domestic plants can only supply about 70% of what the overall demand in the United States is. So we rely on imports coming in from mostly Asia, but Asian producers rely on Middle Eastern oil. So you've got the United States, it's kind of self-sufficient. So anything we make here, we produce the oil, we produce the raw materials, the monomers. We produce that all in the United States and we can produce it all here. So technically nothing outside of the United States directly affects us. Where it does affect us is that import part. So we rely on 30%. It's normally about a 50-50 split for the most part. So we're importing because you can get ABS quite a bit cheaper when you import it at a time. So right now, all of a sudden that 30% delta is gone. So now we only have 70% of our demand. You got allocation as low as 30% across the board. So we don't have a full supply in the United States to hit our ABS demand.
So a couple of things I'm taking away from that is if that 30% is gone, 50% is gone, that still means supply issues, which means price is going to go up even domestically. Second thing I hear is as oil is getting affected in the Middle East and then gets transferred to China, that's creating a lag that you may not necessarily see right away, even though this conflict is around 30 days at this point. It's going to take, to your point a little bit ago, a full year to kind of see all that. Just a quick situation may take months to kind of level out.
So this isn't like your power going out and flipping the power grid back on and everything's good. These are plants being completely devastated. Multi-million-dollar facilities, 100, 200, $300 million facilities that are just wiped off the earth. So it's not like, hey, let's go flip the switch back on, the strait's open and let's go. No, they got to rebuild this infrastructure back up. And so that's the ripple effect that we're talking about. So yeah, once the strait is open, you're going to see a little bit of relief. And we've seen it a little bit for like a day and a half. So you're going to see a little bit of relief. You're going to see those price increases kind of settle back down a little bit. And because price increases are announced a month before that they go into effect, right? So they don't always get the full increase that they're asking for. So if they come out with a 10-cent increase for May, it might settle and they get 2. Well, right now they're getting everything plus some. So we may see some relief if these agreements start coming through and everybody starts playing nice. But even then, you're still going to see inflated pricing because they've got to build the infrastructure back. They got to get their output back up on oil production. You've missed. I mean, they've been 2 weeks down. What has been? No, sorry, 30 days down. So they got to make up for all that, and then they got to get back into the rhythm of day-to-day business. So you're seeing major price increases, anything, and I can't even keep up with them. I got, 3 phone calls today, 4 emails, plus 19, plus 12, plus 20. And I'm going, is that on top of what we've talked about? I have troubles Just tell me what the price is going to be at this point. Cause if I'm ordering it for June, just tell me what it's going to be at that point. And if it changes, give me a shout. Don't tell me +5 or on, cause math is hard for me. But so we're seeing anything from 40 to 60% increases on materials. And that also goes for the domestic. So let's step away from ABS if you're all right with it. Let's go talk about the polypropylenes and polyethylenes that can be 100% sourced from the United States. Now, we look at the opposite effect with polypropylene and polyethylene. Normally, we never export polypropylene and polyethylene, but guess what's happening because all the oil's being disrupted in the Middle East? They don't have the materials to make polypropylene and polyethylene. So we went from exporting maybe 50 million pounds a year from the United States overseas to 200 million overnight. Polyethylene, we were doing, 2 billion, and we're doing 30 billion export.
Which again takes away from domestic supply, which causes the price increase.
It takes it. That's basic economics 101, right? Their supply goes down, their demand goes up. Supply and demand hasn't changed in the United States, but all of a sudden they can export this stuff and their prices just go astronomically through the roof. So we're fighting that as well in the polypropylene and polyethylene markets.
How are you seeing this affected by people like us that buy? I want to make it clear that at this point, before you're making anything for us, that we're buying access to buy materials at this point.
Yeah. So this is what we're doing with our customers. We'll talk about airline specific is, hey, you know what your historicals are. Give me all the POs you can. Give them to me out to the end of the year. So at least I can be in line to get that material. It's not necessarily guaranteed that we're going to get it, but we're in line. We should get it. We can pull a few strings here and there, but
everybody should know. Everybody should know the prices are going to fluctuate from PO to PO potentially.
And that's a constant conversation, and it's never a fun one, right? I mean, nobody wants to hear about it, but I would say polypropylene is a little bit, as far as their inflation, it's real. Yes, we're exporting a lot more, but should we see that inflation here in the United States? No, but the producers are capitalizing on it, and so I can't necessarily talk down on that, but at the same time, it's like, come on, help us out a little bit. You just 30% overnight doesn't help anybody.
Have you seen this trickle down to transportation at this point? As far as not only being able to buy, but being able to receive the product from either direct port to U.S. port to us, or moving around the country at all?
The thing we've seen in transportation is just increases. So we're seeing a lot of surcharges on shipments. But as far as like access to ports, we haven't seen any issues. It's not like the Red Sea issue we saw during COVID. I can't even quite remember what conflict that was, but there was a similar situation, but it was a route. It was a major route for ports coming to the U.S. But no, as far as receiving containers offshore to the U.S., we haven't seen any issues of that. I haven't heard any rumblings about it. It obviously has caused some price increases in the domestic logistics world just for fuel cost alone.
So if there's only so much, I'm thinking, I'm going to put myself in the shoes of the people that we cater on our podcast to new founders. If there's only so much pie to go around, who's going to get the pie first?
Yeah. Well, start looking at opportunities for material changes. We're currently doing that. We have, especially in ABS, that's something we've looked at. So we've looked at mineral filled propylene, we've looked at HIPS, we've looked at polycarbonate. All of those have very similar shrinks. Those are obviously tools that have been built. So we're kind of, I wouldn't say fitting a square peg in a round hole, but we're making do with what we have. But also don't worry too much. This will come back online. So if you're still in the design phase, this isn't something you need to worry about. I wouldn't say go out and price it right now, because Or, you'll know worst case for sure what that would be, what that would look like. So maybe it's a good exercise to see what worst case would look like.
You'd be able to give
Um,
somebody a bell curve of prices over what, 5, 10 year stretch?
yeah. So what I'm doing right now is saying, hey, this is what it would be right now. This is what it would be 2 months ago. And just here's your delta. You can kind of see what the normal market would produce. And this is what current product market would look like. So it's just, let's hope it's a short-term pain. I think it will be. I think, God willing, that, we're out of this within the next 4 to 6 weeks, at least to a point where we're at least able to get product to those producers and we can get back online with oil production. And things will fall in line, 6 months to 12 or 6 to 12 months isn't the end of the world, right? We've been through that. I think the ripple effect in COVID was 3 years. So at the end of the day, 6 to 12 months of pain we can handle. It's just lack of sleep right now.
So beyond ABS, polyethylene, polypropylene, polystyrene, just all the raw plastic that you think of, what else comes into play? Like colorant, boxes, adhesives. I mean, what other inputs are being affected right now beyond the raw?
It's actually really interesting. So I'm talking to obviously multiple industries, and there's a lot of people that aren't seeing anything. So it's from what I can tell, pretty isolated to fuel and plastics. So and it could come out. It could be a rolling effect where I'm just not seeing it yet. But colors really, I'm not seeing it on that. I have heard some rumblings on certain color additives, sulfur. I believe Iran's number one producer of sulfur, and a lot of sulfur is used in some colorants. I believe white might see something there, but it's going to be very specific, very niche products.
And I'm thinking about stuff like we use, like UV and zinc and things like that. Same thing.
Not seeing a whole lot. It's really just those main ABS. You really see it on those big commodities because they need volume of these petrochemical and byproducts and monomers, derivatives of petrochemical, petroleum based. So that's where you're seeing it. The lower volume stuff that you don't see, billions of pounds being produced a year, it's not taking near the hit just because they don't have the sheer volume of it.
Help people understand, and I'm going to ask you to do something very complex over 2 to 3 minutes here, but oil's coming out of the ground. It's going into tankers. It hasn't been refined yet. What's the actual process from taking raw out of the ground, transporting it about, and refining it into a pellet?
So I'm glad you brought that up because that brings up a good point of why ethylene is also going up in propylene. So you bring oil up out of the ground and it can either go to a refinery or it can go to a monomer plant, right? So when all of a sudden we're exporting oil now too, right? So all of a sudden you've got an abundance of oil and, the ethylene and propylene plants are happy and the fuel plants are happy and the refineries. Well, now all of a sudden they're bidding against each other. That's another big thing going on right now. So the fuel companies, the refineries, and the material plants are actually bidding against each other. So they're driving that price up. It's basically if you were to go to what do you call them? Just a bidding competition. So you've got that effect right now with the US. So you got refineries and production plants bidding against each other at an auction. So when the oil comes up, then they have to create a monomer, which polymer grade propylene, which is pre-polypropylene. So they take it to what they call a cracker plant, and they basically break it down and refine it into something that they can create the material with. And that's the base of polypropylene, polyethylene, ABS, basically any plastic out there. Then they send that to production plants, extruders, basically big extruders that run this stuff. And if they compound maybe certain components into it, they've got their different lines. And then they just make billions and billions of pounds of this stuff a year.
So I think all of that plays into that lag that we're seeing over the course of a year for this to recoup, assuming we don't have any other situations come up like a hurricane or other natural events that may affect later on in the year. But what are some other common misconceptions of you just don't turn the switch on?
Again, infrastructure. That's a big one. Catching up, it's going to take a while to catch up. And then just the geopolitical environment right now is so touch and go that you don't know what else is going to pop off. Again, we've got a ceasefire, and then that next morning there were other bombings in other countries, and until that's all settled, I don't think you're going to see real production up and running like it was 3 months ago. Everybody's just kind of on their toes right now, just waiting for the next thing to pop off, fortunately. But no, geopolitically, that's going to be the biggest driver of this all. Is until everything is settled, we're not going to see any relief.
If you quote something today, how long is that quote good for at this moment?
I just quoted something yesterday, 24 hours. You got to jump on it right now. It's constantly changing.
What are either some of your bigger clients or the clients that run a little bit more efficiency doing now that maybe somebody smaller is not doing?
Forecasting. That's a big thing. They're cutting POs way out in advance. When you're smaller, again, the smaller customers aren't going to be as affected as the larger customers. The larger customers, because they rely on volume, right? They're going to be the ones. It's easy to find a box of material, right? I can pull that and, sweep it off their production floor. You can always find a box of material. It's the full truckloads, full container loads that people are really struggling securing, or that there's a scare that they're not going to be able to secure it. So that's the big thing, is just outlook and forecast right now. Is all right. This is what we've taken the last 3 years. This is the average. I'm going to go 20% above that, and we're going to cut those POs out now for the next 10 months.
What's it like when, let's say you have a client that hypothetically uses a full semi truck of material a day, like you just mentioned, and all of a sudden that gets cut in half? Are you having to change molds out more often, or are you having to push stuff around, like day-to-day operations on the floor of an actual injection molder? What's changing on that side of things?
Yeah, potentially you may see some interruptions where, if it's a 4-week run and you've only got 2 weeks of material that you wanted to run that full 4 weeks worth, you may see an interruption there where you're like, hey, I can't get material for another, 4 weeks. I'm going to run what we got, pull it out. As soon as that material gets in, we'll get you back in and running. That would be the biggest interruption that you would notice, other than price.
What are the differences that you're seeing between COVID's longer term shutdown to this? To me, it seems like it's been a sharper adjustment right away.
Yeah, so COVID, it was the opposite effect, because we actually shut the plants down ourselves because there was zero demand. We shut the country down. We shut the whole world down, and nobody was buying anything. Everybody was scared to move any money. They bought their groceries, went home, and kind of hunkered down for a little bit. Well, as soon as that opened up, this is the trickle effect I'm talking about, the lag. All of a sudden, it was like a light switch went off, and people were like, screw that. I'm going out. I'm going to go get some clothes. I'm going to buy from Amazon. I'm going to, all of a sudden Amazon blew up. People are buying like crazy. Well, yeah, you can turn the switch back on and start running immediately, but you've got a lag of, you had an excess of material, and then all of a sudden these production plants started going haywire, but they had to catch back up because they just stopped production. They got to rehire, they got to bring people back in. And then, just turning those things on, it when you've been down for a month, takes a while to get caught back up in the swing of things. It's a similar effect except for the fact that we can't just turn it back on over there. It has to be rebuilt. So similar in the fact that major ripple effect. We saw prices dip lower than anything I've ever seen. That was a time when I actually watched on the television when oil went negative. I don't know if you ever saw that, but I watched oil go down to negative $20 a barrel. Didn't know that was possible. Polyethylene, I was buying it at 32 cents a pound. I heard anything as low as 22 cents for large producers. And then it went from 32 cents to $1.50 within 4 months of that happening. And that's all because of the lag effect that producers weren't able to keep up with the demand. So there's a little bit of manipulation in there, a little bit of artificial inflation, I believe. It'll never be proven. And if you don't hear from me in the next 6 months, it's probably because somehow this went viral and big oil didn't like what I said. But there is a little bit of manipulation in there. I will say in the last 2 years, these plants in the United States just haven't been making their margins because the demand's not at what they need it to be. So, they've been skimming by on 10% margins where they're used to 20. Well, now they've got a blank check sitting in front of them. So they're going to make their money on it. They're going to export and they're going to increase prices. So they're going to, over the next 6 to 12 months, they'll make enough for the next 5 years for themselves. And they know they're going to have to readjust. They know they're going to have to adjust to the market.
What's the differences in for instance, our relationship as I'm your buyer, not having to wait on the time differences dealing with an overseas factory? Like, you're 2 states away, we're in constant contact, we're on the same time zone. That has to speed up communication.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we have distributors that are in constant communication with the importers and the producers, so they can, they're like me to you as they are to the producers. So they're my in between. They're getting direct conversations. A lot of the overseas producers also, they're so big, they've got guys here that are constantly in the distributor stores, talking to them, selling to them, but telling them this is exactly what's going on. So there's no lag for me. I'm a couple degrees away from those large producers, but I have a couple of really good connections that are really tight with those guys. So I get fed pretty quickly. I'm usually 3 or 4 days ahead of the game.
Anything we missed? Anything else you want to cover that we didn't get to?
No, just buckle your seatbelts. It's going to be a wild ride. People aren't, I don't think, going to feel this for a little while as far as the main consumer. You'll see a little bit of inflation. Hopefully these agreements come into play and we can settle down and all play nice for a little bit and get back to normal. I think within the next 6 months, we should see some good traction. Polypropylene, polyethylene should be the first to fall. And then, ABS is going to take a while.
And I want to clarify on the ABS. That's kind of what got us going here. There was a major supplier of ABS that directly got affected by the conflict. If you want to talk on that for a little bit.
Yeah, so we talked about the cracker plants, the monomer plants that are creating the base material for these products. The UAE had one of the largest suppliers that supplied most of Asia. Yeah, they ended up getting a bomb dropped near them, debris hit them, and there's a fire at their facility. So I don't know. I've been reading up on it. I can't tell what the overall impact of that plant was. This is the other thing is, first I heard is that thing got smoked and it was wiped off the face of this planet. I go back and debris fell on it and it caused a fire. Gets my eyes rolling. I'm going, that's the oldest trick in the book. And then it doesn't, I go back and read and there's no real indication of like what the actual effect of it was. So did it burn down the whole thing? I don't know, but that's happening You see refinery plants get blown up over there. It looks like we've really targeted a lot of their chemical manufacturing plants in that area. So all of that's going to affect us. But, again, we got a ceasefire, hopefully no more bombing, and we can wipe our hands of this and move forward. Good Lord. The only other thing I would throw out there, we talked a little, I kind of touched on alternatives, and we always talk about alternatives. Have those in the back of your mind, or have somebody that's thinking about it. Because that was the first thing. We're already qualifying with our customers. Hey, if we can't get this material, these are the next 3 best options. Pick what you guys want. If all of a sudden we can't get ABS, it may not be what you want and what you're used to, but you'll still have parts. So, which is better than nothing. So I would always at least have some sort of plan. It's not for my customers to worry about. It's for me to worry about. It's for the molders to worry about. But if you've got things under control, just have something, or maybe ask that question if you're with a molder right now. Hey, what can we do in case of emergency? What's our break glass option? What's out there?
What are the top 5 products that ABS tends to be made? What's made out of ABS that we can probably see some effects later on?
Yeah, so it's really big in automotive, and they're being allocated significantly. So you're going to see, I would guess, some part changes on some automotive parts. And then, a lot of toys, those are usually ABS. And then, just household items, electrical enclosures, pretty robust. Anything that needs major impact resistance, you're going to see that in there.
Pretty wide spectrum. Have a Merry Christmas, kids. All right. Well, thanks for hopping on this. We're going to get this out immediately and hopefully have updates in the future. If not, just kind of check out our weekly podcast that we're dropping. Again, we're walking first-time founders through, hey, I have an idea. I want to bring it all the way to market, and kind of let them know step by step what they can anticipate, kind of the good, bad, and the ugly. We're kind of really pulling the curtain and letting people see behind the scenes on how things are actually brought to life and brought to market. So Calvin, thank you very much for showing up, and I guess we'll see everybody out there on YouTube and out in the podcast land.